The Appalachian Mountains are 480 million years old, older than the Atlantic Ocean, older than the dinosaurs. They stretch 2,200 miles from Alabama to Maine, through 14 states, and they contain something that 3 million hikers walk past every year without seeing. Something that has been in those mountains longer than any human tradition that has tried to name it. The Cherokee called them Shakonaj, the place of the blue smoke. Not a description of the haze, a warning, a marker for the boundary between the world you can see and the world that runs adjacent to it, between the trail you are walking and the trail that runs parallel to it, in a place your eyes cannot reach. Tonight, we go into that boundary. 15 accounts from people who crossed it. Some of them came back with the words to describe what they found. Some of them came back without. And one of them came back with footage that was posted, was seen, and was gone before most people could watch it. We start in 1969 with a 6-year-old boy, and the last thing multiple witnesses saw before he ceased to exist on this side of the mountain. If you enjoy supernatural stories, consider subscribing. New stories are published regularly. On the afternoon of June 14, 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin stepped off a trail in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and was never seen again. This is a documented fact. It is in the NPS records. It is in the Missing 411 research of David Paulides. It has been reported on by journalists and investigated by researchers for over 5 decades. What is less documented, what exists in the witness accounts filed at the time but has received significantly less attention in the mainstream coverage of the case, is what several people saw in the hours during and immediately after Dennis Martin's disappearance. I want to cover the full case tonight, because the full case is the only way to understand what the partial version misses. The Martin family had been hiking in the Smokies as a group. Dennis, his older brother Doug, their father Bill, and their grandfather. They were experienced outdoors people. They had hiked in the Smokies before. They were on a well-traveled trail near Spence Field, which sits at approximately 4,900 feet elevation in the western section of the park, on a clear afternoon with good visibility in all directions from the open ridgeline. The boys had invented a game. They would sneak up on their father from different directions and surprise him. Doug went right. Dennis went left. Doug appeared from the right and surprised his father as planned. Dennis did not appear from the left. His father turned around. The trail was empty. The time between Dennis going out of sight and being noticed missing was, by every account of the family members present, a matter of seconds. Not minutes. Not a few minutes. Seconds. This detail matters more than it might seem. A 6-year-old child, in seconds, in open terrain with good visibility, covering enough ground to become completely invisible. That is not a lost hiker scenario. Lost hikers take a wrong turn. They wander. They make noise. They can be heard and eventually found. Dennis Martin was present and then absent in the time it takes to turn around. The search that followed was one of the largest in NPS history to that point. Hundreds of searchers, military personnel from nearby Fort Campbell, who were brought in with specialized search equipment, trained tracking dogs from multiple organizations. The search covered the area systematically and repeatedly for weeks. What the search produced was almost nothing. The tracking dogs, which were brought in within hours of the disappearance, when Dennis's scent should have been fresh and easily followed, lost the trail almost immediately, not gradually, in the way that scent dissipates over time and distance. Abruptly. at a point only a few yards from where Dennis was last seen. Multiple experienced trackers examined the terrain around that point. Their collective assessment documented in the search records. There were no tracks in the wet mountain soil consistent with a child moving in any direction from that location. Not a trail that petered out. Not prints that became unclear. No prints. The soil at Spence Field in June 1969 was saturated from recent rain. It was the kind of soil that records every footfall clearly. A 6-year-old boy running through that soil should have left a clear, readable trail for every searcher who came within yards of it. There was no trail. The child who had been running moments before left no physical record of having moved in any direction from the point where he was last seen. The searchers who worked that area in the days following the disappearance have given accounts over the subsequent decades that add a detail to the official record that the official record itself does not emphasize. One tracker, a man who worked the area during the first 48 hours of the search and who agreed to be interviewed for a 2004 documentary on the case, said the following on camera. "I have been tracking in these mountains for 30 years. I have tracked deer, bear, people lost in every condition of weather and terrain. A 6-year-old boy running on wet mountain soil leaves marks. We found nothing. I have thought about that for 35 years. There is no version of normal that produces what we found, which is nothing. Now, the detail that is most often absent from the mainstream accounts of the Dennis Martin case. On the afternoon of June 14, 1969, while the Martin family was realizing that Dennis was missing and beginning to search, a family picnicking approximately 1 mile from Spence Field reported seeing something that they immediately told park personnel about. A figure, moving through the forest at speed, moving in the direction away from the search area, upright, moving in a way they described as wrong, not the motion of a running person, not the motion of any animal they could identify, and carrying what they described as a large, dark sack or bundle over one shoulder. The figure was large. It was moving fast, and it was moving away from Spence Field in the period immediately following Dennis Martin's disappearance. The family who reported this was questioned. Their account was documented. And then, in the way that details that don't fit the official search framework tend to disappear from official search narratives, the detail was filed and not followed up on, not investigated, not corroborated, not published in the mainstream coverage of the case. Filed. Dennis Martin's father, Bill Martin, spent the rest of his life searching for his son and for an answer. He contacted every researcher, every investigator, every official who would speak with him. He died in 2018, 49 years after his son stepped off a trail at Spence Field. He never found Dennis. He never found an explanation. The NPS case file on Dennis Martin is still open. The detail of the figure with the sack is still in it. And whatever was moving through the forest at Spence Field on the afternoon of June 14, 1969, carrying something away from the area where a child had just vanished, that has never been identified. We know what it was doing. We don't know what it was. And we don't know where it went. And we don't know what it was carrying. The second account on tonight's list comes from a man named Gerald Thompson, a ranger with the Nantahala National Forest in western North Carolina, who had worked that forest for 9 years when his encounter occurred in the summer of 2011. Gerald Thompson shared his account with researcher Christopher Balzano, who has spent years documenting ranger and outdoorsperson accounts from the southern Appalachians, and who shared the full and where the behavior of wildlife, particularly deer, serves as one of the primary indicators of what is present in an area at any given time. Thompson had learned to read deer behavior the way a sailor reads weather, as a real-time indicator of conditions that his own senses might not yet have registered. On the afternoon of July 23, 2011, Thompson was on a solo foot patrol of a backcountry section of the Nantahala that received minimal visitor traffic. He had patrolled that section dozens of times over his 9 years with the Forest Service. He knew the terrain, the typical wildlife patterns, the normal sounds and silences of the area at different times of day. At approximately 4 p.m., he noticed that the deer he had been observing at a distance of roughly 150 yards, 3 does feeding in a small clearing, stopped feeding simultaneously and oriented their bodies in the same direction, toward the tree line on the northern edge of the clearing. Not alert but feeding, which is the normal deer posture when a non-threatening presence is detected. Fully stopped, heads up, bodies oriented, frozen in the specific posture that Thompson had learned to associate over 9 years of field work with the detection of a significant predator at close range. He stopped. He looked toward the northern tree line of the clearing. He saw nothing. The deer held their frozen posture for approximately 2 minutes. Then, as a group and simultaneously, they turned and moved rapidly into the forest to the south, not bounding in the explosive flight response that indicates an immediate threat, but moving quickly and purposefully in the way that prey animals move when removing themselves from the proximity of something they have identified as dangerous. The clearing was empty. The tree line was, as far as Thompson could determine from his position, empty. He waited for approximately 5 minutes after the deer departed, then moved slowly toward the northern tree line where the deer's attention had been focused. He reached the tree line and examined the ground at the edge of the forest. The soil at the base of the trees was soft from recent rain. Good tracking soil, the kind Thompson used regularly to read wildlife presence in an area. The ground showed recent disturbance, not tracks in the conventional sense, not the clear, defined impressions of a specific animal's foot. Something had been standing there. The ground showed compression consistent with something of significant weight having been stationary at that location for an extended period. The compression covered an area approximately 3 feet by 2 feet, larger than any deer or bear print, configured in a way that Thompson, with 9 years of experience reading wildlife sign in that forest, could not match to any animal he knew. He photographed it. He measured the area of compression. He noted it in his patrol log as an unexplained disturbance of unknown origin. He did not see what had made it. Whatever had stood at that tree line, whatever had frozen 3 deer simultaneously at 150 yards, whatever had held them in predator-alert posture for 2 minutes before driving them from the clearing, was gone before he reached the tree line. It had been standing there at the edge of the forest, watching the clearing, watching him, and it had left before he arrived. Thompson told Balzano, "In 9 years, I have tracked bear, boar, mountain lion in areas where they shouldn't be. And once, on a trail near Tellico, something I still cannot identify from the tracks alone. What I found at that tree line in 2011 was unlike any of those. The configuration of the compression was bipedal, not the compression of a large animal settling its weight onto all 4 limbs. 2 points of contact. A bipedal animal of significant weight had been standing at that tree line watching the clearing. I know what bear look like when they stand upright. This was not that. The weight distribution was wrong. The spacing was wrong. I have looked at that photograph many times. I still cannot match it to anything in my experience. Thompson filed his patrol log notation. He filed no formal incident report. He told Balzano, "There was nothing I could report. I found a compression in the soil. That is not a reportable event. The fact that I could not identify the animal that made it, that is not a reportable event either. So I noted it, I photographed it, and I kept doing my job." He has patrolled that section of the Nantahala many times since 2011. He has not seen the compression again. He has noticed, on subsequent patrols of that specific area, that the deer behavior in the clearing where the three does froze in July 2011 is consistently different from the deer behavior in adjacent clearings. The deer use the adjacent clearings normally, feeding, moving through, behaving as deer in an area without significant predator pressure behave. In the specific clearing where Thompson's encounter occurred, deer do not feed. They pass through it quickly, without stopping, without feeding, without the normal exploratory behavior that characterizes deer in safe foraging areas. They pass through it the way animals pass through a space they have identified as belonging to something else. The third account comes from a part of the Appalachians that receives less research attention than the national park sections. The hollows and ridgelines of eastern Kentucky in Pike County, where the mountains run deep and the communities that have lived in them for generations have a relationship with the land that is different from anything a weekend hiker brings to a trail. Pike County sits in the far eastern corner of Kentucky, on the border with West Virginia and close to the Virginia state line. The terrain is the folded, layered, disorienting terrain that characterizes the central Appalachians. Ridge after ridge after ridge, with hollows between them so narrow that sunlight reaches the floor for only a few hours each day. The communities in those hollows have been there for a long time. Many of the family names in eastern Kentucky's hollows, Hatfield, McCoy, Combs, Protter, have been there since the 18th century. They know the mountains the way people know the place they have always lived. And several of them know, from family tradition passed down through generations, which sections of their local mountains are not to be approached. The McCoy family, relevant to tonight's account, is not directly connected to the Hatfield-McCoy feud, though they share the regional geography. They are a family that has lived in a specific hollow in Pike County for 4 generations. The account we are covering comes from Robert McCoy, who was 43 years old in the winter of 1987, and who has given consistent accounts of the 3-week period beginning in January of that year to multiple researchers over the subsequent decades. Robert McCoy's account was documented by a regional researcher named James Caudle, who spent years collecting accounts from eastern Kentucky families, and whose unpublished archive was shared with us through a researcher connection. The winter of 1987 was a harsh one in eastern Kentucky. The January temperatures in Pike County dropped significantly below 0 Celsius on multiple nights, and the snow cover in the hollow where the McCoy property sat was consistent and deep. Robert McCoy had lived in that hollow his entire life. He knew winter there. He knew what the snow showed and what it didn't. He knew the sounds of the hollow at night and the absence of sounds that meant specific things. On the night of January 8, 1987, Robert McCoy woke at approximately 2 a.m. to a sound outside his house that he described as footsteps in the snow. Not the light, quick steps of a deer or fox. Heavy steps, deliberate, moving around the perimeter of the house. He lay still and listened. The steps continued. They circled the house once, at a distance he estimated at approximately 20 feet from the exterior walls, and then stopped. He heard nothing more that night. In the morning, he examined the snow around the house. There were impressions, not the clear, defined tracks of any animal he recognized. Deep, roughly oval depressions in the snow, spaced at intervals of approximately 4 to 5 feet, in a pattern that circled the house. The depth of the impressions was inconsistent with any animal in the region. Too deep for a deer, too large for a bobcat, too widely spaced and too upright in their pattern for a bear. The impressions circled the house once and stopped at the point where they had apparently begun, the point closest to the tree line on the north side of the property. Robert McCoy showed the impressions to his wife, Carol, and to his father, James, who was living in an adjacent structure on the property. Both examined them. Neither could identify the animal that had made them. James McCoy, who was 71 years old in 1987 and had lived in that hollow for his entire life, said, according to Robert's account, only one thing about the impressions: don't go near the tree line at night. He did not explain. He went back inside. The impressions returned the following night, and the night after, and for 3 weeks, with only 2 nights of exception, something circled the McCoy property in the hours between midnight and 4 a.m., leaving the same deep, widely spaced depressions in the snow, completing one circuit of the house and stopping at the same point near the tree line on the north side. The 2 nights when the impressions were absent corresponded to nights when Robert McCoy, unable to sleep, had turned on the exterior lights of the property. On those nights, he heard nothing and found no impressions in the morning. On every other night, the impressions were there. Robert McCoy attempted twice to observe what was making the impressions directly. On the first attempt, on the night of January 19th, he positioned himself at a window with a view of the north side of the property and waited with a flashlight. He heard the footsteps beginning at approximately 1:30 a.m., the familiar heavy, deliberate steps in the snow. He aimed the flashlight through the window at the area where the sound was coming from. Whatever was walking stopped immediately when the light was directed at it. He could see nothing in the flashlight beam that he could identify as an animal or a person. The snow between the house and the tree line was empty to his view. The footsteps did not resume that night. On his second attempt, on the night of January 24th, he went outside. He positioned himself at the corner of the house nearest to the tree line and waited in the dark without a light. The footsteps began at approximately 2 a.m. They were coming around the south side of the house, approaching his position from the far side of the building. He waited. The steps came closer. They rounded the corner of the house, the corner he was standing at. They stopped. At a distance he estimated at approximately 8 to 10 feet from where he stood. He turned on his flashlight. The snow between him and the tree line was empty. No animal, no person, no visible source for the footsteps that had approached to within 8 feet of him in the dark. The footsteps had stopped. There was nothing in front of him. But the impressions, fresh, deep, clearly defined in the snow, led directly to a point approximately 8 feet from where he stood. And then stopped, as if whatever had been walking had ceased to occupy physical space at the moment his light came on. Robert McCoy went back inside. He did not go outside again after dark for the remainder of the 3-week period. The impressions ceased appearing after the night of January 28, 1987. He has no explanation for why they stopped when they did. James McCoy, his father, died in 1992. He never elaborated on his single comment about the tree line. Robert McCoy is still alive. He still lives in the same hollow in Pike County. He has spoken about the 3-week period in January 1987 to 3 researchers over the subsequent decades. His account has not changed. He says, "I know what made those marks is not something I can name. I know it was real because the marks were real. And I know it was aware of me because it stopped every time I used a light. Something that stops when you use a light knows that you are there. Something that knows you are there is not random. Whatever came to that hollow in January of 1987, it came for a reason. I do not know what the reason was. My father did not tell me. And I have spent 36 years deciding that I do not need to know." The 4th account was posted online in 2021 by a trail runner who identified herself only by her first initial, C, and who had been running the Appalachian Trail in Virginia on a solo early morning run in October 2019. The post appeared on 2 separate subreddits, Paranormal and RR Humanoid Encounters, within the same week, archived by multiple users before the accounts were deleted. We have the archived versions of both posts. We verified that the timing, the location details, and the description in both posts are consistent. They were clearly posted by the same person describing the same event. C described herself in the post as an ultra-marathon runner who had been trail running in the Appalachians for 7 years and who did not believe in the paranormal. She used that specific phrase, "I do not believe in the paranormal," in the opening paragraph of both posts, before the account itself, and again at the end, after having described what she saw. She was running a section of the AT in George Washington National Forest in Virginia at approximately 5:45 a.m. on a clear October morning. Dawn light was sufficient for running without a headlamp, but the forest on either side of the trail was still in the deep shadow of the pre-dawn hour. She was running at what she described as a comfortable pace. A pace she knew well. A pace she had maintained across hundreds of miles of trail over 7 years of running. She was approaching a section of trail that curved around a large rock outcropping when she became aware of something on the trail approximately 60 to 70 yards ahead of her. Her initial assessment was automatic and immediate. A person, standing on the trail, facing away from her in the direction of travel. She registered the shape as human, upright, bipedal, the right general size range for an adult person, and adjusted her pace slightly, as trail runners do when approaching other trail users. She was running toward it for approximately 4 seconds before she noticed what was wrong. The figure was not moving. A person standing on a trail at 5:45 a.m. in October, in a position facing away from an approaching runner, would move, would step aside, would turn, would register the sound of approaching footfalls. The figure did not move. It stood completely still, in the specific stillness that C, in her post, described as not the stillness of a person who hasn't heard me yet. The stillness of something that has decided to be still. She slowed her pace without stopping. She continued moving toward the figure, now at a walk. At approximately 40 yards, she could see it more clearly in the improving light. What she described in the post, and what she described consistently across both versions. The proportions were wrong. The torso was too long for the leg length. The arms were too long, hanging at a distance from the body that she described as not how arms hang when you're standing. The head was the correct size, but positioned differently than a human head is positioned. Slightly too far forward on the neck, at an angle that she described as like someone looking down, except it wasn't looking down. At approximately 30 yards, she stopped. The figure remained still. She stood on the trail for what she estimated was 2 minutes, watching it. It did not move. It did not adjust its weight. It did not breathe in the visible way that a person standing still in cold October air breathes. The condensation of exhaled breath in cold air was absent from the figure in front of her, though it was visible from her own breath and had been visible from other hikers she had passed earlier in the morning. Then, without any apparent stimulus, the figure turned its head. Not its body, only its head. It rotated toward her, a smooth, continuous rotation that brought the figure's face to a profile orientation relative to her position. She described the profile in the post, human in its general geometry, wrong in every specific. She wrote, "I know what a human face looks like in profile. The proportions are specific. The relationship between the jaw and the eye and the forehead are things I would recognize as wrong at a distance, and I did. What I was looking at was close to a human face in profile. It was not a human face." She turned and ran. Not the controlled retreat of someone making a sensible decision. She ran. She covered the next 3 miles of trail, she said, in approximately 16 minutes. A pace she described as faster than she had ever run that section before. She did not look back. When she reached her car at the trailhead, she sat in it for 45 minutes before she drove home. She went back to that section of trail 3 weeks later in daylight, with a friend she had not told about the encounter. She wanted to look at the trail section where the figure had been standing. She found, at the approximate location where she had stopped during the encounter, that the trail surface on either side showed the kind of compressed, disturbed vegetation that indicates something has stood in a location for a period of time. The disturbance was at the edge of the trail, not in the center where a hiker would stand, but at the very edge, at the boundary between the packed trail surface and the beginning of the forest floor. As if whatever had been standing there had been standing not on the trail, but at the very limit of the trail, at the exact boundary between the space used by hikers and the space that belongs to the forest. She photographed it. She did not post the photographs publicly. She deleted her accounts after the posts she had made attracted more attention than she was comfortable with. We reached out through an intermediary. She confirmed the account and confirmed that the photographs exist. She has not given permission to publish them. What she has given permission to share is her final paragraph from the longer of the 2 posts. "I am a person who runs alone in the dark in remote mountain terrain, and I have never been afraid. Whatever was standing on that trail in October 2019, I was afraid. Not of what it might do. I never got the impression it was going to do anything. I was afraid of what it was, because what it was is not something I have a category for. And not having a category for something that is standing 30 yards in front of you is the most frightening experience I have had in 7 years of solo trail running in the Appalachians. It is standing in front of me now, in my memory, with its head turned. And I am still running." The 5th account comes from a hunter named Ray. He asked that his surname not be used, and researcher Jody Cook, who conducted the original interview, has honored that request consistently in his published documentation of the case. Ray was 54 years old in November 2011 and had been hunting white-tailed deer in the mountains of eastern Tennessee for 31 years. He was not a casual hunter. He was the kind of person for whom hunting is a practice requiring deep knowledge of terrain, animal behavior, weather, and ballistics. Someone who could read a forest the way a trained tracker reads a trail, who knew the difference between the various sounds of a forest at different hours and seasons, and who had encountered over 31 years of backcountry hunting in Tennessee. a wide range of wildlife in a wide range of conditions. He had encountered black bears at close range, including one encounter that he described to Cook as genuinely threatening. He had shot deer, turkey, and hog across 3 decades in terrain that most people never enter. He was, in Cook's assessment, and in the assessment of the several colleagues Cook spoke with who knew Ray, not a person who was easily frightened, and not a person given to exaggeration or fabrication. Ray's encounter occurred on the morning of November 9, 2011, during the second week of deer season. He was in a ground blind, a natural concealment made from fallen branches and leaf litter, on a ridge in the mountains east of Cookeville, Tennessee, at approximately 7 a.m. He had been in position since before dawn. The morning was clear and cold, conditions he described as ideal for the stand he had chosen, with good visibility along the ridge and into the hollow below it. At approximately 7:15, he heard something moving in the hollow below his position. The sound was bipedal, 2-footed, not 4, and heavy. His immediate assumption was another hunter moving through the area, which was legal and not unusual on public land during deer season. He remained still and watched the edge of the hollow where the sound was coming from. What emerged from the hollow and onto the ridge below his position was not another hunter. Ray's description to Cook, given in a recorded interview that Cook conducted in 2013, 2 years after the encounter, is specific and consistent across multiple subsequent retellings. The animal, he uses that word consistently because he says he has no other word that is both accurate and acceptable, was bipedal, approximately 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair that he described as the color of dried mud. The face was not human, but was primate in its general geometry. Flat, with forward-facing eyes, and a jaw structure he described as more prominent than a human jaw. It was moving along the ridge at a pace he described as unhurried, a walking pace that covered ground faster than the stride length should have produced. It was moving at a walk, but covering ground that he would have covered at a run. He watched it for approximately 90 seconds before it became aware of him. He knew when it became aware of him because it stopped. Not the gradual deceleration of an animal that has detected a faint stimulus and is assessing it. It stopped completely, mid-stride, with an abruptness that he described as mechanical, like a machine being switched off. It turned its head toward his position. It looked directly at him. Ray had his rifle, a .308 Winchester bolt-action that he had used for deer hunting for over a decade. He raised it. He fired. At a range he estimated at approximately 70 yards. With a rifle he had confirmed at the range the previous week to be accurate within 1 inch at 100 yards, he fired at the center of the animal's visible mass. The animal did not fall. It did not stagger. It did not react in any way consistent with having been hit by a .308 rifle round. It turned and began moving away from him along the ridge. He chambered another round and fired again. The animal did not react. He fired a third time. The animal did not react. It continued moving away from him at the same unhurried walking pace, covering the ground at the same impossible rate. He fired a fourth time. The animal did not react. It reached the far end of the ridge and disappeared into the forest. Ray sat in his blind for a very long time after the animal disappeared. He then descended to the ridge where it had been walking and examined the ground. He found the impressions of its passage, deep, bipedal compressions in the soft soil of the ridgeline, widely spaced, consistent with the stride he had observed. He found no blood. He found no hair. He found no physical evidence of any kind that a .308 rifle round had connected with anything at that location. He followed the impressions to the point where the animal had entered the forest. He did not follow them into the forest. He returned to his vehicle and drove home. He told his wife what had happened. He told Cook 2 years later. He has told almost no one else. His reason, which he gave to Cook, and which Cook documented: "I have a reputation in this county. I have hunted with these men for 30 years. If I tell them I shot at something 4 times at 70 yards with a .308 and it walked away, I am either lying or I cannot shoot. I know I can shoot, so the other option is what I have to live with." What Ray saw on that ridge in November 2011 absorbed 4 .308 rifle rounds at 70 yards and walked away. What it was doing on that ridge, and where it went, those questions do not have answers. The 6th account was posted to a hiking forum in 2017 by a woman named Claire, who identified herself as a solo through hiker who had completed the Appalachian Trail twice and who described herself, in the opening of her post, as someone who does not believe in the paranormal, and who was posting her account despite that because the alternative, carrying it alone, had become untenable. The forum moderators left the post in the main section rather than moving it to the ghost story thread, which was their standard practice for accounts that could not be categorized as conventional safety information, but that they considered credible enough to warrant main section visibility. Claire was camping near a shelter in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, the same general section of the AT that C, our 4th account's trail runner, had encountered something in 3 years later. She does not know C. The overlap in location was not known to us until we had both accounts and compared them. It is the kind of detail that we note and do not explain. Claire had set up her tent on a flat section of ground approximately 30 yards from the shelter, as was her practice. She preferred tenting alone to the communal shelter, particularly on weeknights when the trail was quiet and the shelter population was low. The night of October 14, 2016 was quiet. She had gone to sleep at approximately 9 p.m., exhausted from a long day. She woke at approximately 1:30 a.m. to complete silence. She described the silence in her post with a specificity that trail users recognize immediately. Not the quiet of a calm night, which still contains insects, wind, the small sounds of nocturnal animals moving through the leaf litter. The specific total absence of sound that happens when everything in a forest stops simultaneously. She had experienced this twice before in her 2 through hikes and knew it for what it was: a primary indicator of large predator activity in the immediate area. She lay still in her sleeping bag and listened. For approximately 8 minutes, the forest was completely silent. Then she heard footsteps on the trail outside her tent. They were bipedal. They were moving along the trail in the direction of the shelter, approaching her tent from the south and moving north past her position. She described them in her post with the precision of someone who had spent hundreds of nights on trail and knew exactly what different footsteps sounded like on different surfaces. These were heavy, deliberate, evenly spaced, and the spacing was wrong. She had been a solo-through hiker for long enough to know the rhythm of a human walking at a normal pace on a flat trail. The interval between footfalls, the weight distribution, the sound of a foot landing. What she heard outside her tent had the rhythm of bipedal walking, but with a stride interval that she estimated, based on the time between footfalls and the normal relationship between stride length and ground speed, as approximately 5 feet per step. 5 feet. A very tall person has a natural stride of approximately 3 feet. A 5-foot stride at a walking pace requires a leg length that no human being has. The footsteps passed her tent over the course of approximately 40 seconds. They did not slow as they passed her position. They did not pause. They continued north along the trail at their consistent, impossible pace and faded into the distance over the course of about 2 minutes. Then silence for approximately 10 more minutes. Then the forest sounds returned. Gradually, tentatively, in the order that Claire had learned over years of trail experience was the order in which wildlife reestablishes normal activity after a significant predator has moved through an area. Small insects first, then larger insects. Then the first cautious bird calls far away. Then, slowly, the normal ambient texture of a forest night reassembling itself. Claire lay awake until dawn. She described her decision not to exit the tent during or after the footsteps as not coming from fear. It came from a clear assessment that whatever had passed her position had not stopped, had not shown interest in her specifically, and that exiting the tent to investigate would be introducing a new variable into a situation she did not fully understand. She waited for daylight. At first light, she exited her tent and examined the trail surface north and south of her position. The trail surface at that point was soft from the previous day's rain, the kind of surface that records every footfall clearly. Going south from her tent, toward the direction the footsteps had come from, she found normal human footprints from the previous day's hiker traffic. Going north from her tent, in the direction the footsteps had traveled, she found nothing. The trail surface that should have recorded a set of bipedal footsteps with a 5-foot stride, footsteps she had clearly heard for 40 seconds at close range, was undisturbed. She examined it carefully for 100 yards north of her tent. Nothing. Whatever had walked past her tent on the trail at 1:30 a.m. on October 14, 2016, had produced sound precisely consistent with a large bipedal animal walking at a normal pace, and had left no physical record of having walked there. She posted her account in 2017. She received hundreds of responses. Most of them were supportive. Several were from other AT thru hikers who described similar experiences in the same general section of Virginia. The same total forest silence, the same bipedal footsteps at impossible stride lengths, the same absence of tracks in the morning. She responded to several of these before stopping. She told one respondent, in a comment that was archived before she deleted her account, "I am not looking for an explanation. I had an experience that I cannot explain, and I posted it because I needed it to be somewhere outside of my own head. What I am less prepared for is how many people seem to have had the same experience in the same place. That is more unsettling than the original event. The 7th account comes from a group of 3, 2 brothers named Marcus and David, and a friend named Thomas, all in their mid-30s, all experienced backpackers who had camped together in the Appalachians multiple times over the previous decade. They submitted their account to a regional outdoor forum in 2019, approximately 1 year after the events occurred, and all 3 wrote their individual accounts before comparing notes with each other. The researcher who collected the accounts, a woman named Patricia Wells who has spent years documenting group encounter reports from the southern Appalachians, confirmed to us that the 3 accounts were written independently and submitted before any of the 3 men had read each other's versions. The consistency between the 3 independent accounts is the element of this case that researchers find most significant, not dramatic consistency. Not the kind of identical detail that suggests collaboration. Natural consistency. the kind where the essential facts align and the peripheral details differ, which is what genuine independent accounts of the same event look like. The three men had camped in a clearing in the Nantahala National Forest in September 2018. They had chosen the clearing because it was level, dry, and offered a wide sightline in multiple directions. The kind of campsite that experienced backpackers prefer because you can see what's coming. They set up their 3 separate tents in a rough triangle within the clearing, ate dinner, talked until approximately 10 p.m., and went to sleep. All 3 of their accounts describe what happened next, beginning with the same event, waking simultaneously, not approximately simultaneously, simultaneously. Marcus described it as waking up and knowing immediately that David and Thomas were also awake, before I had any confirmation of this, because the quality of the silence inside the clearing had changed. David described it as a sensation of being fully, completely conscious with no transition period. No groggy, half-awake stage, just asleep, and then completely awake, like a switch. Thomas described it as waking and knowing something was wrong without knowing what it was yet. All 3 descriptions are different. All 3 describe the same event: instantaneous, simultaneous, complete waking. The time, according to the watches all 3 had with them, 2:17 a.m. All 3 accounts then describe the same awareness, something at the edge of the clearing, not inside the clearing, not in the forest, at the exact boundary between the clearing and the tree line, at the point where the open kiss estimated at 20 minutes, David estimated at 15 minutes, and Thomas estimated at 25 minutes. The variation in their time estimates is consistent with the subjective experience of stress on time perception, what they agree on completely. The figure did not move during the period they observed it. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It stood at the boundary between the clearing and the forest with a stillness that all 3 described independently, using language about choice. Not the stillness of an animal that has frozen in response to detecting a threat, but the stillness of something that had decided to be still. Then, and all 3 accounts describe this the same way, it was gone, not moving away, not stepping back into the forest, present, and then not present. The 3 men exited their tents together after the figure's disappearance. They checked the ground at the tree line where it had been standing. The ground showed a circular compression, a roughly circular area approximately 8 feet in diameter, at the exact location where the figure had been standing, pressed flat in a way that was inconsistent with a single large animal having stood there, and consistent with something of very significant weight having been stationary in that location for an extended period. Marcus photographed it. David photographed it separately. Thomas photographed it. All 3 photographs exist. Patricia Wells has seen all 3. She describes them as showing the same compression from 3 different angles, consistent with their individual positions in the clearing. The 3 men broke camp at dawn and did not return to that section of the Nantahala. Thomas, in a follow-up exchange with Wells that she documented, added one detail that he had not included in his original account. He said that when the figure disappeared, he had the immediate and complete conviction that it had not gone anywhere, that it was still there, at the tree line, in a way that his eyes could no longer perceive. He said he had not included this in his original account because he did not know how to distinguish between a genuine perception and an anxious interpretation of an event he could not explain. He still does not know how to make that distinction. He said, "What I can tell you is that we packed up and left, and when I looked back at the tree line from the trail, I felt the same thing I had felt in the tent, that it was still there, that it was watching us leave, that it watched us until we were out of its clearing. The eighth account is the one I have returned to more than any other since I first found it. It was posted to a hiking forum in 2021 by a solo hiker named Alan. He provided his full first name and a partial last initial. The account was detailed, specific, methodical, and accompanied by photographs that he described in the post as being included because he understood that without them, the account would be dismissed. The photographs are in the archived version of the post. I want to describe this account carefully because it contains an element that does not appear in any other account on tonight's list, and that connects, in a way that Alan himself identified and documented, to accounts from entirely different locations and entirely different times. Alan was completing a 3-day section hike through the Grayson Highlands in southwestern Virginia, one of the most distinctive landscapes in the entire Appalachian Range. The Grayson Highlands are open, windswept moorland at over 5,000 feet elevation. Unlike the dense enclosed forest of lower Appalachian terrain, the Grayson Highlands offer long sight lines in multiple directions. You can see for miles in good conditions. Wild ponies graze there freely, a population that has been on those highlands for over a century. It is, in the daylight, one of the most beautiful and least threatening sections of the entire AT. At night, at over 5,000 feet, in the wind that comes off the highlands without obstruction, it is a different environment entirely. Alan was camped at approximately 5,200 feet on his second night. The campsite was a flat area of the moorland with a wide sight line in all directions. He had chosen it deliberately for the visibility. He went to sleep at approximately 9 p.m. He woke at approximately 2 a.m. to a sound that he described in his post in the following terms: rhythmic, low, and large. Not music, not wind, not any animal vocalization he could identify. Something breathing, slowly, at a regular interval, outside his tent. He described the sound as coming from a location he estimated at approximately 30 to 35 feet from his tent door, south of his position, slightly uphill, in the direction of a section of moorland he had camped next to deliberately for its flat approach. He lay still and listened. The breathing continued at a consistent interval. He timed it. Approximately one breath every 8 to 10 seconds. Long inhalations, long exhalations, completely regular, with no variation in rhythm or depth over the period he listened. He described the sound in a note he had added to his post as not the breathing of something sleeping, the breathing of something that was awake and still, the breathing of something that had chosen to be present at that location and was settled into that presence. He did not exit the tent. He lay still for approximately 90 minutes, timing the breathing, listening for any change in its location or its character. It did not change. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It breathed at 30 to 35 feet from his tent door with absolute regularity for 90 minutes. At approximately 3:30 a.m., the breathing stopped. Not gradually. It stopped between one exhalation and the next, as if a switch had been thrown. Alan lay still for another 30 minutes after the breathing stopped. Then he dressed, took his headlamp, and sat outside his tent until dawn, watching the area where the sound had come from. He saw nothing. At dawn, he walked to the location where the breathing had seemed to originate. The ground cover at that location, the moorland grasses and low vegetation of the Grayson Highlands, showed a circular area of compression approximately 8 feet in diameter, pressed flat in a pattern consistent with something of very significant weight having been stationary there for an extended period. He photographed it. He measured it with his trekking pole. He photographed the measurement. He noted in his post that the location of the compression, relative to his tent position, was consistent with his estimate of 30 to 35 feet. The estimated location of the source of the breathing he had heard for 90 minutes. He posted the account in 2021 with the photographs. The forum thread generated hundreds of responses. Most were supportive. Several were from other Grayson Highlands hikers who described similar experiences in the same general area. The rhythmic sound at night, the compression in the morning. One respondent pointed Alan to the Nantahala group account we covered as our 7th case tonight. Alan reviewed the Nantahala account and noted the correspondence of the compression dimensions, 8 feet in diameter in both cases, in a follow-up comment. Then his account was deleted, not by the forum moderators, by Alan himself. He stated in a brief final comment before deleting, "I have decided that having this publicly connected to my name is not something I want. I am not retracting the account. The photographs exist. The compression exists. The breathing was real. I am removing this because I need the ability to talk about it on my own terms, in my own time, with people I choose." Before the deletion, the follow-up comment in which he identified the correspondence between his compression and the Nantahala compression was archived by 3 users. One of those archived versions is in our research files, the 4 words that Alan used to describe what he believed had been outside his tent. 4 words that he used in a direct message to a researcher who reached out to him through the forum before he deleted his account. 4 words that the researcher shared with us with Alan's permission are 4 words that appear in different forms, but with the same essential meaning. In accounts from the Nantahala case, the Smoky Mountains campfire case, and the Olympic Peninsula unmapped trail case that we covered in our Park Rangers video. 4 words, from 4 different accounts, from 4 different states, from witnesses who have never met and who did not have access to each other's accounts when they wrote their own. The 4 words are, something that was waiting. Before we continue to the next story, if you're enjoying these accounts, consider subscribing. It's a great way not to miss what comes next. The 9th account marks a transition in tonight's list. The 8 accounts you have heard so far are documented. They come from named witnesses, from research files, from archived posts that can be located and reviewed. The accounts from here forward are different. They are inspired by real reports, by accounts that have been submitted to researchers, to online communities, to us directly, but they are presented as composites. The details come from real experiences described by real people. The specific individuals are not identified, because the people whose accounts informed these stories asked not to be. We are telling you this clearly, as we said at the beginning of tonight, because the distinction matters. These are not fabrications. They are the shape of things that have been reported, rendered in a form that protects the people who reported them. With that established, the 9th account. He came to the Blue Ridge Parkway the way photographers come to the Blue Ridge Parkway in October, for the color. For the moment when the ridge turns from green to the particular orange and red and gold that the deciduous forest of the southern Appalachians produces in mid-autumn, and the low morning light catches it at the angle that makes it look like the mountain is on fire from the inside. He had been photographing the parkway for 6 years. He knew the best overlooks, the best morning angles, the specific conditions of weather and light that produced the images he was looking for. He had a system: arrive before dawn, position at the chosen overlook, wait for first light, work the light for the first hour as it changed from pre-dawn blue to the warm gold of full morning, pack up, and move to the next location. He had done this dozens of times. The morning of October 16, 2017, was the kind of morning he had been waiting for all season. A temperature inversion had produced a dense valley fog that lay below the ridge line, visible from the overlooks as a sea of white, with the ridge tops emerging above it like islands. He photographed for approximately 40 minutes, working a section of overlook that faced east across a valley, with the fog below and the ridge opposite lit by the rising sun. He was alone at that overlook. There were no other vehicles in the parking area when he arrived, and none appeared during his shoot. At approximately 7:20 a.m., he noticed something in the fog below the overlook. A shape, rising partially above the fog surface, approximately 200 yards from the overlook edge, in the valley below the ridge. His first assessment: a rock formation. There were rock formations in that valley. He had photographed them before, partially visible above autumn fog, but the shape was wrong for the formations he knew. It was vertical, narrow, and it was moving. Not fast, slowly, as if rising through the fog from below. He raised his camera and photographed it. He shot approximately 40 frames over the next 3 minutes as the shape continued its slow vertical movement through the fog. Then the fog shifted slightly. A breath of morning wind moving the surface, and the shape was gone. Submerged again in the white below the ridge line, he reviewed his images in the field on the camera's rear screen. The valley in the frames was clear. The fog was there. The ridge opposite was there. The shape was not. In 40 frames shot over 3 minutes, while he watched a shape rise through the fog with his naked eye, not one frame showed anything in the valley beyond the fog and the trees. He went home and processed the raw files carefully. The full resolution versions, not the compressed previews. He applied every adjustment he knew to maximize the visibility of the valley through the fog. Nothing. The shape that he had watched for 3 minutes with his naked eye, that he had photographed specifically and repeatedly, that had been clearly visible to him at 200 yards, did not appear in a single image. He has spoken about this experience to 2 people, his wife and a photographer colleague who has extensive experience with atmospheric optics and who gave him the conventional explanation first: low cloud formations, temperature inversion artifacts, the way human vision perceives shapes in fog that cameras do not register the same way. He accepted this explanation. He continued photographing the parkway. He has not returned to that specific overlook in the 6 years since October 2017. He has not been able to articulate why exactly, except to say that the shape he saw rising through the fog below the ridge was moving with a quality that atmospheric artifacts do not move with. It was moving with what he described to his colleague as intention. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't dispersing. It was rising, with purpose, through the fog, toward the ridge, and when the wind moved the fog and it went back under. I had the feeling that it had gone back under deliberately, that it had decided to go back down, not that the wind had covered it, that it had chosen to stop rising, and that it was still there, below the fog, exactly where I was standing above it. He deleted the 40 frames. He told his colleague it was because the images were technically unusable. Too much fog, not enough sharpness. He did not tell his colleague that the images were technically fine. that the fog was sharp, that the trees were sharp, that the ridge was sharp, that the shape simply was not in them. The 10th account involves two sisters. We will call them Sarah and Ellen. They were 31 and 28 years old in the summer of 2015. They had been hiking together since childhood, beginning with family day hikes in the mountains of western North Carolina where they grew up, progressing through their 20s to multi-day backpacking trips in progressively more remote terrain. By 2015, they had completed sections of the AT, several loops in the Smokies, and a full traverse of the Black Balsam area near where tonight's account takes place. They were, by any measure, experienced hikers who knew the terrain they were in. The Shining Rock Wilderness is a section of the Pisgah National Forest in Haywood County, North Carolina, centered on Shining Rock, a large outcropping of white quartz that gives the area its name and that is visible from miles away in clear conditions. It is a popular but genuinely remote wilderness area. No maintained trails, no blazes, navigation by topo map and compass, limited cell coverage. Experienced hikers treat it with respect. Sarah and Ellen arrived at the Black Balsam Knob trailhead on the morning of July 18, 2015, with a planned 2-night loop. The first day was unremarkable. They camped near the Ivester Gap Trail Junction, cooked dinner, went to sleep early for a long second day. The second day, July 19th, began normally. They broke camp at 7 a.m., navigated toward Shining Rock, made good time in clear morning conditions. They reached the Shining Rock outcropping at approximately 10:30 a.m. and stopped to rest and eat. There were no other hikers in the immediate area. At approximately 11 a.m., Sarah walked approximately 30 feet from their rest position to photograph the view from a slightly different angle. Ellen remained seated where they had been eating. Ellen called out to Sarah after approximately 30 seconds to say they should start moving again. Sarah did not respond. Ellen looked in the direction Sarah had walked. Sarah was not there. Ellen stood and walked to the point where Sarah had been standing. She was not there. The terrain in that direction was open. The white quartzite of the Shining Rock outcropping with low vegetation and wide sight lines for hundreds of yards in every direction. There was nowhere for a person to go. In 30 seconds, that would make them invisible from the point where Ellen had been sitting. Ellen called Sarah's name. No response. She searched the immediate area for approximately 20 minutes, calling continuously. Nothing. She activated her emergency locator beacon, a personal locator beacon she carried as standard equipment for wilderness travel, and sat at the Shining Rock outcropping and waited. Search and rescue arrived approximately 4 hours later. 2 hours after search and rescue arrived, 6 hours after Sarah had walked 30 feet to photograph a view and did not come back. Sarah walked into the search perimeter from the east. Calmly, at a normal walking pace. She was uninjured. She was not distressed. She was, by the assessment of the search and rescue personnel who met her, completely calm in a way that they found, in retrospect, unusual for someone who had been separated from her hiking partner in a wilderness area for 6 hours. Sarah's account of the 6 hours is the element of this case that has no explanation. She did not have one. She told the search and rescue team that she had no memory of the 6-hour period. Not hazy memory. Not fragmented memory. No memory. Her last clear memory was raising her camera to photograph the view from the edge of the Shining Rock outcropping. Her next clear memory was walking across the terrain east of the rock at a normal pace toward the search perimeter. 6 hours between those two memories. no explanation for how she had covered the distance she had covered. The location where she reemerged was approximately 2 miles east of where she had been standing when Ellen last saw her. She had no injury consistent with having crossed 2 miles of wilderness terrain in 6 hours. She had no memory of crossing it. She had no memory of anything. The sisters drove home the following morning. Sarah spent the following weeks attempting to recover the missing 6 hours through every available means: meditation, hypnotherapy, sustained effort to recall any fragment of the gap. She recovered nothing. The 6 hours between raising her camera at the Shining Rock outcropping and walking east toward the search perimeter remain completely absent from her memory. She hikes with Ellen occasionally. Still, she has not returned to the Shining Rock wilderness. Ellen has not returned either. They have agreed, without explicitly discussing the agreement, that the Shining Rock wilderness is not a place they will go back to. They have not explained this agreement to anyone. When asked why they have not returned to an area they had previously hiked without difficulty, Sarah gives the same answer each time. She says, "I don't know what happened to me in those 6 hours. I have decided that not knowing is acceptable. What is not acceptable is the possibility of finding out." The 11th account comes from Linville Gorge in Burke County, North Carolina, one of the deepest gorges in the eastern United States, carved by the Linville River through Precambrian rock over millions of years. The gorge walls rise approximately 2,000 feet above the river floor. The terrain inside the gorge is among the most difficult in the eastern Appalachians. Dense rhododendron thickets, unstable slopes, river crossings that are possible in summer low water and dangerous in any other condition. The Linville River itself, running through the bottom of the gorge, is one of the most productive trout streams in the region. Fly fishermen come from across the southeast to fish it in summer. He was one of them. He had been fishing the Linville for 8 years. He knew the gorge the way serious fishermen know their waters: the specific pools, the feeding lines, the behavior of the fish in different water conditions, the light angles at different times of day. He arrived at his chosen section of river at approximately 8 a.m. on a Thursday in June 2020, a weekday, and had the stretch entirely to himself. He began working the near bank, moving slowly upstream, reading the water as he went. At approximately 9:30 a.m., he became aware of something on the opposite bank. The Linville River at that section of the gorge is approximately 60 feet wide, a significant distance across moving water, but close enough in good morning light to clearly identify what is on the far bank. What he saw on the far bank was a figure, standing at the edge of the water, upright, still. He described it in the account he submitted to us as person-shaped but not person-sized, taller than any person he could recall standing next to, standing with a stillness that he noticed specifically because the far bank of the Linville in that section is not a comfortable place to stand still. It is rocky, uneven, the kind of ground that requires constant small weight adjustments to maintain balance. The figure was not making those adjustments. It was simply still, in the way that something is still when the terrain beneath it presents no challenge to its balance. He watched it for approximately 5 minutes before he resumed fishing. He made a note of it in the way that outdoors people make mental notes of things that don't fit. Flagged for later consideration, not yet a problem. He fished upstream for approximately 90 minutes. At approximately 11 a.m., he moved back downstream toward his original position and looked across the river. The figure was still there. Same position, same stillness. 3.5 hours since he had first noticed it. He stopped fishing and watched it for approximately 15 minutes. It did not move. He attempted to identify it, to resolve its shape into something he recognized. The distance was 60 feet in good light. He had polarized fishing glasses that reduced the glare off the water and improved his ability to see clearly across the river. What he could determine: upright, stationary, approximately 7 to 8 feet tall, with a coloring that he described as inconsistent with any clothing or equipment he could identify, and a stillness that had now persisted, unbroken, for at least 3.5 hours in the period he had been observing it. He resumed fishing. He fished the stretch until approximately 5 p.m., working back and forth across his section of river multiple times. Every time he was in a position to see the far bank at the figure's location, which he estimated was approximately 8 times over the course of the afternoon, the figure was there. Same position. Same stillness. At approximately 5:30 p.m., the light in the gorge began to change. The sun dropping below the gorge rim and the lower level light transitioning to the flat, even illumination of the pre-dusk period. He began preparing to leave. He looked one more time at the far bank. The figure was still there. Then, as he watched, it moved. Not toward him. Not into the river. It turned away from the river, away from him, and moved into the rhododendron thicket on the far bank. He watched it go. The rhododendron at that section of the far bank is dense enough that a person would need to force their way through it. The figure did not slow as it entered the thicket. It moved into it at the same pace it had used when it turned from the river. A smooth, continuous movement that the dense rhododendron did not appear to impede. Within approximately 10 seconds, it was gone from his view. He stood at the river's edge for a long time after that. He left the gorge before dark, which was a departure from his usual practice of staying until full dark when the fishing was good. He drove home and ate dinner and sat for a long time. He has returned to the Linville twice since June 2020. On both subsequent visits, he has fished the opposite bank, the bank where the figure had been standing. He found, on his first return visit, a section of the far bank at the approximate location where the figure had been standing, where the vegetation was compressed in a wide, irregular pattern, consistent with something of significant weight, having stood there repeatedly over a period of time. Not once, repeatedly. The compression in the vegetation covered an area of approximately 10 feet by 4 feet at the water's edge, where the bank was flat enough to stand comfortably. He photographed it. He has the photographs. He has not posted them publicly. He told us, "I went back because I needed to know if I could stand in the place where it had stood." I stood there for approximately 5 minutes, looking at the bank where I had been fishing, at the distance across the river. And I understood, standing there, why it had stood there for 8 hours without moving. From that bank, in that position, you can see everything on the other side. You can see anyone who enters the water. You can see the entire stretch that I fished. It is the perfect observation position for that section of river. Whatever was standing there was not there by accident. It had chosen that position. It had chosen it well. And it had been patient in a way that I find, the more I think about it, more disturbing than anything else about the encounter. Not the height, not the stillness, the patience. 8 hours of patience, watching a single person fish a single section of river. That is not curiosity. That is something else. I do not have a word for what it is. The 12th account comes from a professional trail guide, a man named Daniel who has been guiding groups on sections of the Appalachian Trail in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee for 11 years. Daniel submitted his account to us directly after watching our previous Appalachian video, identifying himself by first name and confirming that the account described a real experience, that the details are accurate, and that the client involved gave him explicit permission to share the account without identifying her. Max Patch is a bald, an open, grassy summit at approximately 4,729 feet in the Pisgah National Forest, on the border between Haywood and Madison counties in North Carolina. It is one of the most photographed locations on the entire Appalachian Trail. The open summit, with its panoramic views of the surrounding ranges and the distinctive profile of the Great Smoky Mountains visible to the west on clear days, draws hikers who have no interest in multi-day backpacking, but who want the trail experience in an accessible form. It is, in daylight, in good weather, one of the most welcoming places in the entire Appalachian Range. Daniel was guiding a group of 6 on a 2-day overnight trip that included a sunset camp on the summit of Max Patch. The group was mixed in experience level. 2 experienced hikers, 4 beginners who had hired Daniel specifically because they wanted the AT experience without the navigation and gear requirements of independent travel. The approach to Max Patch from the trailhead is a gradual ascent through forest that opens suddenly onto the bald summit. The transition from enclosed forest to open meadow is abrupt, and, as Daniel describes it, consistently produces a specific response in people who experience it for the first time. A physical reaction to the sudden openness, the sudden sky, the sudden sight lines in every direction. The group emerged from the forest onto the bald at approximately 5:30 p.m., with approximately 2 hours of daylight remaining. 5 of the 6 members of the group produced the response Daniel was accustomed to seeing. The sharp intake of breath, the instinctive pause, the moment of taking it in before moving forward. The 6th member, a woman he calls Margaret, in her mid-40s, a first-time AT hiker who had described herself to Daniel on the approach as someone who had wanted to hike the trail since her 20s and was finally doing it, produced a different response. She stopped at the tree line, at the exact boundary where the forest ended and the bald began. She stopped, and she looked at the summit, not with the expression of someone taking in a beautiful view, with an expression that Daniel described as recognition. Not wonder, he told us, not awe, recognition, the expression of someone who has seen something before. Except she had told me on the approach that she had never been to Max Patch. He let the group move forward and stayed back with Margaret. He asked her if she was all right. She said yes. He asked if she wanted to go up. She said yes, but didn't move. He stood with her at the tree line for approximately 3 minutes. She was looking at the summit with that expression he described as recognition. Then she walked forward, onto the bald, and the expression was gone. She camped with the group, ate dinner, watched the sunset, slept, hiked out the following morning without incident. She was, for the remainder of the trip, entirely normal. On the drive back to the trailhead parking lot, Daniel asked her carefully about her reaction at the tree line. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I saw something on the summit." He asked what she saw. She said, "Something that was already there when we arrived. Something that moved back into the forest when we came up onto the bald. I watched it move back into the tree line from where I was standing. I don't know what it was. I'm not going to describe it because I don't have the words and because I think the words would sound wrong." He asked her why she hadn't said anything to the group. She said, "Because it was leaving. It was moving away from us. Whatever it was, it had decided to leave when we arrived. I didn't want to call everyone's attention to something that was already going." He asked her if she would describe it to him, separately from the group. She said, "No, I would describe it to you, and you would have it in your head for the rest of your life. I don't want to do that to you." Daniel has guided that Max Patch section 47 times since September 2016. He has not seen the expression on anyone else's face that he saw on Margaret's face at the tree line. He has looked for it. He watches for it now, every time the group emerges from the forest onto the bald. That moment of transition. That instant when the enclosed forest gives way to the open summit. He watches their faces. He is looking for the expression that means someone has seen something that was already there and is now leaving. He has not seen it again. He is not certain whether he hopes to see it or hopes not to. He said, "What Margaret saw on that summit, I will never know. She protected me from knowing it deliberately. I am grateful for that, and I am not grateful for it. Both of those things are true at the same time. And every time I come up over that tree line onto Max Patch, I look at the summit before I look at the view. I look at the tree line on the far side. I look for something moving back into the forest. I haven't seen it, but I know it was there. Margaret saw it. And whatever she saw, she decided I was better off not knowing. The fact that she made that decision, that she assessed what she had seen and concluded that I should be protected from it, is the most frightening part of the whole account for me. The 13th account comes from a registered nurse named Carol, who worked in the palliative care unit of a hospital in Asheville, North Carolina, for 9 years, before leaving the profession in 2021. She submitted her account to us in 2023, 2 years after leaving nursing, because she said she had spent those 2 years deciding whether she was willing to say publicly what she had witnessed privately. She decided she was. Carol's account is not about something she encountered in the mountains. It is about something a patient described to her. Something a patient had encountered in the mountains before he arrived at her unit. The patient, she calls him Mr. H, which is not his initial but a designation she chose to protect his family's privacy, was admitted to the palliative care unit in February 2019 with a terminal diagnosis. He was 67 years old. He had been a lifelong resident of the western North Carolina mountains, born, raised, and lived his entire life within 40 miles of Asheville. He had hiked the local mountains since childhood, hunted them, fished them, known them the way people know the place they have always lived. When Carol met him, he was in the early stage of his admission, still alert, still communicative, still able to have extended conversations. He was, by Carol's description, a practical man. Not sentimental, not given to storytelling or dramatization. The kind of man who described things as they were. On his 3rd day in the unit, during Carol's evening check, he asked her if she had ever spent much time in the mountains at night. She said she hiked occasionally. He nodded. He said he had something he wanted to tell her, something he had not told his hair, covering the body from the crown of the head to the feet. Upright, completely upright, with no forward lean of the torso that bears show when they attempt bipedal posture. Upright, the way a person is upright, with the specific alignment of spine and hip and shoulder that indicates an animal for whom bipedal posture is natural, not effortful. He stopped. It did not move. He described its face, what he could see of it at approximately 60 yards in the fading afternoon light. Flat, broad, with eyes that he described as forward-facing. Predator eyes, he said. using the hunter's distinction between forward-facing eyes and side-facing eyes that separates predators from prey in nearly all mammalian species. He stood at the edge of the clearing for what he estimated as 2 minutes. It stood at the far edge for the same period. Neither moved. Then it turned, slowly and completely, and walked into the forest on the far side of the clearing. Not running. Walking, with the same natural bipedal gait he had observed while it was standing still. He heard it moving through the forest for approximately 30 seconds after it disappeared from view. Then silence. He went directly to his truck and drove home. He told his wife he had seen a large bear. He had never told anyone the truth of what he saw in that clearing until the evening he told Carol, in February 2019, from a hospital bed in Asheville's palliative care unit. Carol listened to the full account without interrupting. When he finished, he said 2 things that she has not been able to stop thinking about in the years since. The first, I have hunted those mountains for 40 years. I know what is in them and what is not. What I saw in that clearing is not in any book or any category I know. But it is real. It lives in those mountains. I have known it was there my whole life without ever seeing it, and now that I have seen it, I am sure it has always been there. The second, I am not afraid of dying, but I am glad I am dying here, in this building, in this light, with people around me. I would not want to die on that ridge. I would not want to be alone in those mountains at the end. Whatever is in them, I do not think it is indifferent to death. I think it pays attention to death, and I would not want its attention at mine. He died 11 days after that conversation. Carol was present. She said he died peacefully, in the way that palliative care is designed to allow, without pain, with his family around him, in a room full of light. She said that in the final hours, as his awareness of his immediate surroundings diminished, he occasionally looked toward the window with the expression she had come to associate, over 9 years of palliative work, with patients who were seeing something at the edge of their perception that the living people in the room could not see. She does not know what he was seeing. She does not know if it was the approaching end of consciousness, or a hallucination, or something else entirely. What she knows is that in the final hour, he looked toward the window twice, and both times, after looking, he closed his eyes and appeared briefly to be afraid. The 14th account is the oldest on tonight's list, and in some ways the most significant, because it comes from a time when the Appalachian Mountain communities were still largely intact as closed systems, before the interstate highways opened the mountains to outside traffic, before television standardized the cultural references available to people in the hollows, before the specific homogenization of American culture that makes it difficult, today, to be certain whether a reported experience is genuinely independent or shaped by shared cultural exposure. In 1978, a folklorist named Margaret Hensley was conducting fieldwork in Haywood County, North Carolina, collecting oral histories from elderly residents of the mountain communities that were, even in 1978, already disappearing as younger generations moved to the cities. She was interviewing a man named Elias. She uses only his first name in her field notes, which are held in a private family archive that his granddaughter shared with us. Elias was 81 years old in 1978. He had been born in the same hollow where he still lived, had worked the same land his father and grandfather had worked, and had, by his own account, left the county only twice in his life, once for military service in World War II, and once, briefly, for a medical procedure in Asheville in the early 1960s. He was, in the truest sense of the term, a man of that specific place. During the interview, which covered his family history, the history of the Hollow, and the farming and hunting practices of the community, Hensley asked him about a section of the mountain adjacent to the hollow that appeared on the survey map she was working from, but that no one in the community had mentioned during any of her previous interviews. She described the location and asked what was in that section of the mountain. Elias was quiet for a long time before answering. Then he said, "That's not a place people go." She asked why. He said, "Because of what's up there." She asked what was up there. He was quiet again. Then he told her. In 1963, when he was 66 years old, he had gone into that section of the mountain for the first time in his life. He had hunted the surrounding mountains for 50 years and had never entered that section because his father had told him not to. And his grandfather had told his father not to. And back through the generations, the prohibition on that specific section of the mountain had been passed down as fact without explanation, the way some prohibitions are passed down, not as superstition but as practical information about a specific hazard, the way you teach a child not to put their hand in fire. He went in 1963 because he had a specific reason. A section of fence line on the boundary of his property ran along the edge of the prohibited area, and a section of it had come down in a winter storm and needed to be repaired. The repair required him to enter the prohibited area by approximately 40 yards. He went in the morning with his tools with his dog. His dog refused to cross the boundary. He went alone. He described what he found to Hensley in terms that she transcribed verbatim in her field notes. He found nothing unusual for the first 30 yards. Normal mountain forest, mixed hardwood, rocky ground, the particular dense quiet of enclosed mountain terrain. At approximately 40 yards from the boundary, the point where the fence repair was needed, he found a clearing. Not large, approximately 30 feet across. He had not known the clearing was there. It was not visible from outside the prohibited area. It was not on any map he had seen. In the clearing, he found the following: a series of depressions in the soil arranged in a rough circle approximately 20 feet in diameter. Each depression was approximately 2 feet across and 1 foot deep. The depressions appeared old. Their edges were weathered. The soil in them was compacted and undisturbed. The vegetation around them had grown to accommodate their presence over what appeared to be a long period of time. They were not new. They were not recent. They were old enough that the forest had organized itself around them. He repaired his fence and left the clearing. He told no one what he had found. Not his wife. Not his children. Not his neighbors. He told Hensley in 1978, 15 years after the incident, because she was an outsider who was leaving, and because he was 81 years old, and the account was, in his words, something that should be written down somewhere before I'm gone, even if the writing doesn't explain it. Hensley asked him why he thought the depressions were significant. He said, "My grandfather told my father, who told me, that the reason that section of mountain was not to be gone into was because something used it. Not lived there, used it. The way you use a place for a specific purpose and come back to it. My grandfather never said what the something was. I never knew what it was. I went in there once and I found the place it came back to. And I decided that knowing what I had found was enough. I did not need to know what made it." Hensley asked how old the prohibition on that section of mountain was, how far back it went in his family. He said he didn't know. He said it went back as far as anyone in his family could remember. He said, "My grandfather was born in this hollow in 1849. He had the prohibition from his father. His father was born here too. However far back that goes, that's how old it is. Whatever uses that clearing has been using it for longer than my family has been in this county. And my family has been here since before the United States was a country." He died in 1981. Hensley's field notes in her granddaughter's archive contain the verbatim transcript of that interview. The section of Mountain Elias described has never been publicly identified. The clearing has never been located by any researcher, whatever has been using it, for however long it has been using it, is presumably still using it. The prohibition that was passed down through Elias's family, without explanation across generations, as practical information, was not wrong. He went in once. He found what was being used. And he spent the next 15 years deciding that knowing was enough, and that what had made the depressions did not need to know that he had found them. The 15th and final account on tonight's list is the reason this video exists. Not the only reason. The 14 accounts before it are their own reasons. But this one is the account that, when we found it, made us understand that tonight's list was not 15 separate stories. It was one story, told 15 ways, across 2 centuries and 14 states, and the full length of the oldest mountain range on the continent. The account involves a trail vlogger, someone who documented their long-distance hiking on video for a small but dedicated online audience. He had been documenting his southbound through hike of the Appalachian Trail since Maine, posting short videos every 2 to 3 days, building an audience of several hundred followers who had been with him since the beginning of his journey. He was, by October 2022, in Tennessee, the final state before Georgia, the final state before the southern terminus at Springer Mountain. He had been on trail for approximately 4 months. He knew the trail. He knew himself on the trail. He was, in the estimation of the followers who had watched him every day for 4 months, a composed, methodical, observant person. Someone who noticed things, described them precisely, and maintained a consistent presence on camera that his followers had come to know well enough to read. On October 17, 2022, he posted a video. It was different from his previous videos in ways that his followers noticed immediately. In the comment section that was archived before the video was taken down, multiple followers noted the difference before most of them had seen the content. The video was shot entirely at night. His previous videos had been shot in daylight. It was shot from a fixed position, his camera propped against something, pointed at him sitting outside his tent. His previous videos had been handheld, moving, dynamic, and he did not speak for the first 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He sat in front of the camera in the dark with his headlamp on and looked at the camera without speaking. Then he spoke. He described what he had seen on the trail that afternoon at approximately 4 p.m. in a section of the forest in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, approximately 11 miles from the next shelter. He had been hiking alone, standard for a through hiker in the late season when the trail population is thin. In terrain he described as dense, enclosed, the kind of forest where the trail is a green tunnel and the visibility on either side is measured in feet rather than yards. He had come around a bend in the trail and stopped. Something was standing on the trail approximately 50 yards ahead of him, upright, still, facing him. He described it for approximately 8 minutes of the video, slowly, carefully, with the specific vocabulary of someone who was trying very hard to be precise. He described the height, approximately 7 feet. He described the coloring. Dark, the color of shadow. Difficult to distinguish from the surrounding forest except that it was standing in the clear trail corridor where the forest was not. He described the proportions. Human in their general organization, wrong in every specific. The torso too long, the arms too long. The head positioned differently than a human head is positioned on a human neck. He described the stillness. Complete, sustained, the specific stillness of something that had been standing in that position before he arrived and intended to remain in it. And he described what happened when he stopped. It looked at him. He used that phrase. It looked at him with a specificity that he explained. He said, "I am using that phrase deliberately because it describes something more specific than being seen. Being seen is passive. Being looked at is active. Whatever was on that trail looked at me the way I look at something I am assessing, with intention, with specific focus. It looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they are deciding how to solve." He stood on the trail for approximately 6 minutes, he said. It stood on the trail for the same 6 minutes. Neither moved. Then he took 1 step backward. The thing on the trail took 1 step forward. Same pace. Same distance, as if maintaining the 50 yards between them was a deliberate choice it was making in response to his movement. He took another step backward. It took another step forward. He turned around and walked, not ran. He said he did not run because running, in his assessment, would have been the wrong response. Would have been a signal of a specific kind of vulnerability that he did not want to transmit. He walked at a fast but controlled pace back along the trail. He could hear it behind him, not following at the same distance, not gaining on him, maintaining the distance he had established by stepping backward, 50 yards behind him, matching his pace. For approximately 40 minutes, as he walked back along the trail in the direction he had come from, he could hear it behind him at that consistent distance. Then, and he said this was the element of the experience that had produced in him the specific quality of fear he was still experiencing hours later when he recorded the video. The sound stopped. Not gradually, not because he had moved out of auditory range. It stopped, mid-stride, between one footfall and the next. He kept walking. He did not hear it again. He could not determine the moment when it had stopped following him. He could not determine whether it had turned back or whether it had simply become silent while continuing to follow, or whether it had done something else entirely that he had no framework to account for. He reached the shelter he had passed earlier that day and stopped there for the night. He set up his camera. He sat in front of it for 4 minutes and 30 seconds without speaking. Then he described everything he had just told you. The video was posted at 11:47 p.m. on October 17, 2022. It received 43 views before it was deleted at 6:14 a.m. on October 18, 6 hours and 27 minutes after posting. The followers who had been with him since Maine noticed the deletion immediately. Several of them had archived the video before it was taken down. The archive exists. The followers who watched the video before deletion described, in their own archived comments, an element of the video that we have not yet mentioned. They described the expression on his face throughout the recording. Not fear, exactly. They struggled to characterize it precisely in the same way the guide Daniel struggled to characterize Margaret's expression at the Max Patch tree line. The closest characterization from a follower who had watched every video he had posted since Maine and who had observed his face on camera hundreds of times. He looked like someone who had learned something. Not something frightening, something significant. The expression wasn't, "I was scared." It was, "I understand something now that I didn't understand before, and I am not sure what to do with the understanding." He posted one more video 4 days later, from Springer Mountain at the southern terminus. He had finished his through hike. The video was 7 seconds long. He was standing at the terminus marker. He looked at the camera for 7 seconds without speaking. Then he reached forward and turned the camera off. He has not posted since. 15 accounts, 2 centuries, 14 states. A 6-year-old boy who stepped off a trail in 1969, and a trail vlogger who posted a 7-second video from the southern terminus in 2022 and has not posted since. A hunter who fired 4 rifle rounds at 70 yards and found no blood. A ranger who found a bipedal compression in soft Nantahala soil and spent 9 more years watching deer avoid the clearing where he had stood. A family in a Kentucky hollow whose ancestral prohibition on a section of mountain went back to before the United States was a country. A woman in a palliative care unit in Asheville who heard a dying man describe, with 40 years of fieldwork precision, something standing in a clearing east of town, and a guide who watches the faces of his clients every time they emerge from the forest onto Mac's Patch, looking for the expression that means someone has seen something already there, and leaving. The Appalachians are 480 million years old. They have been inhabited by human beings for at least 15,000 years. The traditions of the people who lived in them longest describe, with consistent and locationally precise detail, presences that the mountains contain. Presences that are not metaphorical, not symbolic, not the projection of human anxieties onto a large and unfamiliar landscape. Real, present, operating by rules that are not our rules, in terrain that has been theirs for longer than any human being has been anywhere on this continent. 3 million people walk into these mountains every year. Most of them walk out. Most of them walk the trails between the trailheads and the shelters and the summits, and never come close to what tonight's accounts describe. But some of them, the ones who go far enough, who stay long enough, who enter the sections of terrain that the official maps do not fully describe. Some of them come close to something, and some of them, the hunter named Ray, the trail runner named C, the 2 brothers and their friend in the Nantahala clearing, Alan at Grayson Highlands, who lay awake for 90 minutes listening to something breathe 30 feet from his tent door. Some of them come very close indeed. The mountains are still there. The trails are still open. Whatever was in that clearing at Spence Field in 1969, whatever has been using the circular depressions in the Haywood County Hollow for longer than Elias's family has been in that county. Whatever matched the trail vlogger's pace for 40 minutes through the Cherokee National Forest in October 2022. It is still there. Patient. In possession of terrain it has occupied for a very long time, and the Appalachians, as they have always done, as they did for Dennis Martin's father who searched for 49 years, as they did for the generations of mountain families who passed down their prohibitions without explanation. The mountains keep their secrets. In the blue smoke, in the closed hollows, in the sections of trail that nobody's GPS maps correctly. They keep everything. They always have. If you enjoy supernatural stories, consider subscribing. New stories are published regularly. If you have spent time in the Appalachians, on the trail, in the backcountry, in the hollows and on the ridges and in the sections of terrain that don't appear on the maps you were given, and something happened that you have been carrying without knowing where to put it, tell us in the comments. Location. What you saw. What you heard. whether the forest went silent first, whether it matched your pace, whether you found a compression in the ground the next morning. We read everything. We take every account seriously. We are building a record. And the record, when you lay all of it side by side the way we did tonight, is larger and older and more consistent than any single account can show alone.